I think for the cost, we have a much higher performing roster than we should, mostly due to statistics. And I think also most people, when they hear stats, they're perceiving that you go to like op.gg and you look up a champion win rate, or you like look at the players' stats from Oracle's Elixir or something.
Yeah.
But we have access to a lot more, like we put the statistics that we have in context.
This is Zento from Esports Heaven, and I have here with me CLG's head coach, Weldon. And so with you guys getting knocked out of playoffs, how do you think your mental is? No, it's all good. How do you think your mental is holding up as far as the team is concerned? Like, how do you maintain their mental after a loss like that?
Well, obviously this isn't the way we would want to end the split, and it's really disappointing. But in terms of like maintaining mental, you don't. That's not really the goal. When you get knocked out at the end of the season, there's no need to maintenance mental or learn from that game because you have 3 months of off season. So players can go through the grieving process completely naturally on their own. They can take a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however long it takes to go through, denial, anger, frustration, whatever the 7 stages of grief are. And and then bring it back in. It's only during the season that you have to recover from losses instantly, so you can go next. But in this case, sadly irrelevant.
Okay, so I want to jump into the game because I know a lot of people are going to question the Nico pick for top lane. So could you kind of explain your guys' draft thought process in choosing that champion?
Yeah, well, Nico is a Vladimir counter that wins lane the entire game and always has pressure, and is a split pusher, which fits Darshan's style really well, fits our team's style really well. And it worked so successfully against TSM that they were pretty enraged by it afterwards. We heard that they were really frustrated about how they lost draft, and I think it's something that we can play because Darshan has worked it up and is able to counter Vladimir on it really strongly. So obviously we could have picked a more team fight champion, but yeah, we decided to, since we had the snowballing jungler, that we decided to give him full pressure to enter the jungle at every phase and to contest Sejuani on every single buff. Okay,
so as far as your 10-man roster, this is kind of your baby in terms of what you wanted to, I guess, progress as a team and as an ideology for CLG. So with that said, it doesn't seem like it worked to what you had imagined it. So what do you think were the flaws with your system as a 10-man roster for this season?
Well, our goal at the beginning of the season was to try to make playoffs. We thought we were going to be fighting for 5th and 6th place. And I think it's really, actually a really good capstone that we, Echo Fox was kind of like our brother team throughout the whole season. We did a lot of training together. Both had a rough patch and both subbed out their starters and then subbed them back in and got a huge boost in performance afterwards. So I think that it's kind of funny that in the last game of the season, it was the deciding match between both of those. So I don't really think that it didn't work. I would contest that it worked exactly as I expected to. I mean, when you put somebody on the bench and then they get motivated and then they fight themselves off the bench, that's what happened. That's what's supposed to happen. And it's pretty unavoidable not to happen unless you have a amateur player who gets benched and whines about it. But we don't really have that in CLG or in professional esports. Most players really fight to find their spots on the starting lineups.
So speaking of one player in particular, which is under heavy criticism, and I imagine after this game as well too, would be Darshan. Now, as far as Darshan's play, everyone was expecting all right, Zion Spartan's going to be coming out, he's going to be wrecking faces, let's go. And then as the season progressed, more and more fans started to get disappointed about his gameplay. So do you think the whole comments, I guess, from fans or social media or whatever has affected Darshan's mentality as a player?
I don't think Darshan is the kind of guy who really is affected by what other people say as much as his own vision of who he is and his identity. And he probably works harder than most other players that I've seen in terms of trying to find ways of making the team successful and making his own lane successful. And his champion pool is pretty massive. Yeah. So I would say, like, I think that while statistically he may look like he doesn't match up to other top lane players, if you just look at like the raw stats, you have to remember that top lane is one of the roles that isn't defined very well by stats, because some games you're playing tank, some games you're playing carries, and then depending on how your team drafts, that skews it wildly. So you can really only analyze players when you look at, for example, their success rate in specific games compared against other players. So if you take all of the carry top games from all of the teams and put them together, and when we do that, you look and you see that like Darshan fits in there with the rest of the players. So I think that the perception mainly comes from a little bit from our mispreparation during the week, a little bit from coaching staff, not doing things right in terms of the pick and ban, and then just not being able to execute on team comps that look really bad when they lose.
Yeah.
So for sure, yeah. But I'm sure that, like, if you asked Darshan the same question, he would put the mantle of responsibility on himself. He'd say, yeah, I did call this and I did call this, and they weren't the right calls, and we lost, and I learned from it. So, yeah, I think that it's definitely been really great working with him again. I got to work with him in 2015, and he took a lot of lessons from that 2015-2016 time when CLG was really high and having a lot of good results, and he has carried them forward consistently. So
I want to touch on I guess your thoughts on stats, because I remember earlier in the split when you were constructing the roster and everything, and you had gone through those CLG inside videos or whatnot, and you were talking about stats as a larger, or at least a significant proponent on how you would build a roster. And when I look at stats, for instance, I view them as very hard to contextualize, especially as you were saying with the whole top laner, and maybe you can consider like DPM one of the harder things to do, because it largely relies on champions, and like say if you're an Ezreal, obviously you're going to poke a whole lot. So do you think your reliance on stats has maybe been towards your detriment in constructing a roster like CLG in the lineup that you have right now, or what are your thoughts on that in general?
I think for the cost, we have a much higher performing roster than we should, mostly due to statistics. And I think also most people, when they hear stats, they're perceiving that you go to like op.gg and you look up a champion win rate, or you like look at the players' stats from Oracle's Elixir or something. Yeah. But we have access to a lot more, like we put the statistics that we have in context, right? So for example, I'm not looking at DPM, right? I'm looking, for example, when we're examining Aatrox, we're looking at the jungle proximity of Aatrox within the comps and comparing them globally, and trying to figure out like exactly why and how these picks work.
Sounds like a lot of work.
yeah. And CLG, of course, works with Madison Square Garden Company, and they are a professional team holder. So they have the Knicks and the Rangers, and so they're very familiar with this concept. Obviously, they also have statistics divisions within their teams, and everything that we do already has to be justified by numbers towards corporate. So just making those more accurate and more useful for us, since we're doing them anyway, is really the only way forward as in terms of a coaching staff. We're going to be using statistics to justify all our decisions, because that's how it works in a corporation. Therefore, we may as well make them accurate and correct. And then if they're accurate and correct, we should make our decisions by them, because they're accurate and correct, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of like, it's a cyclical thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So lastly, I just want to get your opinions or your closing thoughts on CLG and kind of the end of the season, and where you guys think you're headed towards summer split, just for all the fans, and what are your thoughts on?
Well, I'm really proud of the players for this season, and I think that you fans should give them a lot of credit for the work that they did. I think that it's not easy for a rookie jungler to come in and not only have his first season on stage, but also, and with an LCS team in an LCS environment, but also to be like the primary shot caller for the team, learning everything about that. I remember when Ray came in to LCS scrims, he had the mental endurance of a rookie, right? Of somebody who was in academy. So he would make it like maybe 4 games of fully intense focus where he's pushing himself. And then the last 2 games would be kind of questionable rage games here and there, but then by the end of the season, he was able to make 8 solid games a day plus solo queue, like with full focus. So that kind of mental endurance like doesn't happen. You can't train for that. You can't prepare for it. You can't be in academy and be like, okay, I'm going to come in like strong, right? You have to actually come in and live that life and be tested and have this trial by fire and really be pushed. And that stress-related growth is the pushing for that. So this season was a failure in a lot of ways, but it was also a success in very huge ways that are going to be very important for summer season. And obviously not making playoffs is not something we ever want to do. Like, I don't even get paid if we don't make playoffs in terms of like my bonus pay, right? So like everybody suffers. Like, nobody's saying like, oh yeah, it's totally fine that we didn't make playoffs, but I still contend that like making playoffs and playing 1 more week is pretty irrelevant in the long scheme of things. Championship points obviously don't matter at all from the spring split into the summer split for going to Worlds unless you place 1st or 2nd place. So the whole like, oh, I hope we get quarters so we can get a few championship points to help for Worlds is like a pointless argument. I think that our team would be stronger if we went to playoffs, and if we played more stage games, that would be awesome. And now this year, only the first, there isn't even a 3rd and 4th place match.
No,
right? So really, the biggest benefit of making playoffs and getting to semis was that you would go and get stage experience for the 3rd and 4th place match. That's even off the table this year. So luckily, a lot of the downside of not making playoffs is mitigated by the fact that I don't think we would have contended for 1st or 2nd place with our team. Although C9 and TSM, those games were pretty dang close. So actually, I'm not really sure about that. It's hard to say. I think that TSM and C9 have a lot more styles they can pull out in a best of 5. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, most.
I think that CLG we were getting good at playing away, but in a best of 5, that's really a hindrance. If the other team can just like ban that out and just play a different style of video game. So so I'm just realistic about that. Like, let's be honest. I have to be realistic, and since I'm the coach, it's my job to be unrealistic to my players and tell them I believe the world in them, and then be realistic to the fans and say, statistically speaking and observationally, this is what you can see is true. So other than that, I'm not going to comment on any off-season or off-season moves. Obviously, we're going to look to make the strongest roster we can going into summer season, both for Academy and LCS.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for the interview. This has been CLG's head coach, Weldon, and Azento from Esports 7. Thank you. I assume if you made it this far, you probably enjoyed the content. So if you did, subscribe, and also check out my other content that's more analytical and opinionated. But otherwise, keep it locked at esports7.com, and I'll see you next time. Peace.